yeah, we are the Spur Road design team. So this is the private residence on the Bellamy River in Dover, New Hampshire. So you can see the zoomed out photo over there with the aerial and the little red box over our residence. And then here's another aerial of just showing the residence and the shoreline. For this project, we broke the shoreline into two different areas of study or interest. So we have the naturalized shoreline to the south, some of which has healthier shoreline. And then as you move north, it starts to erode a little bit more. And then once you go north of the dock, you can see there's a stone wall there. That is also not really in the best of shape and something we'll talk about in a little bit more. And then here is ground level photos of the three different areas. So the southern section you can see is a little bit more stable. There is vegetation growing. It's a little flatter slope, so it's the least concern of all. And then the middle section, we have the soft slope that is starting to erode. You can see it sloughing down in that bottom middle photo. And then the northern section of our site, which is the retaining wall, and you can see that bottom photo of it starting to fall down. So on this site, we have a variety of impairments and stressors. So the impairments are that the high marsh is restricted to a narrow band. There you can see that there's a nice lawn that the owner utilizes often. And then that quickly drops down into the mudflats and some marsh on the south side, and then degrading down as you move towards the wall on the north side. So these stressors at the site, this is a tidal river. So you have the tide coming up and down daily. And then that comes with sea level rise as we move forward in time. In the winter, you have lots of ice moving up and down the river, getting attached to the shoreline, breaking off soil and such, and then causing scour along the bank. Now Magdalena is going to talk about other site constraints.
So as we had some meetings with the property owner and with the team, site visits and discussions, and analyzing the documents, what we found was that there were some site constraints. The property owner has a few docks out there in front of the whole area on the Bellamy River. So the seasonal dock storage was an issue that we had to address, or not an issue, but a challenge that we had to work with. It's a beautiful waterfront property, so he maintains that lawn, obviously for uses, as Annique said, personal uses. There is a historic bulkhead there that was just degrading. It's still there, so we had to figure out what we were going to do with that bulkhead, and especially because it's shared with the a butter. Yeah, that's right. And then, he has a whole irrigation system on that lawn. So obviously, we had to figure out how we were going to try to restore and reestablish some of the marsh, and what we were going to do with that irrigation system, and sort of come to a compromise per se. And again, the retaining wall we had extensive discussion to figure out what we can do with that as well. So, clearly as a design team, we had ecological, sort of the whole project goals were, to try to reestablish some of the ecology. We wanted to protect the salt marsh, we wanted to restore it, and also provide, sort of some conditions for future growth of the marsh and migration inland. I mentioned, and then what we had to do basically is align the landowner goals. As Corey was mentioned, this project is based on what are the goals of the property owner, but at the same time, align them with what the goal of the, this whole project is, which is to basically restore some of the marsh and to reduce the erosion on these properties. And so it was a challenge to sort of try to do both and balance them out. But I think with a lot of discussion and sort of a lot of encouragement from the team, and obviously a lot of the recommendations from the professionals, we were able to have some really good, in-depth, robust discussions with the landowner, where he feels like his goals were being met, but at the same time, we are trying to kind of push the envelope a little bit to try and implement some of these design recommendations that would create some restoration for the future and, restore some of the marsh.
All right, hi everyone, I'm Jill. I'm going to talk about kind of some site analyses that we did to inform the design. So first we went out a few times into the field to collect some data, and you can see here, we did a site topo survey. You can see the transects in red there for the shoreline cross sections. We delineated different zones of the marsh and identified vegetation. You can see those in green. And then we also installed 6 of those bank erosion monitoring pins that Tom talked about, kind of just pounded them flush horizontally into the bank. And then Tom kindly went out a few more times to measure them for us so that we could assess the erosion rate. That was the field collection. Oh, and then also, actually, it wasn't pictured on that last slide, but we installed a water level logger to assess the fluctuation of the tidal water levels at the site. And we use that data. Here you can see kind of the blue fine line in the background is the actual continuous 5-minute increment data. And we use that to pull some statistics for the different tidal datums, which are shown with the colored lines for, the mean tide line, mean high water, mean higher high water, et cetera. And then those are used to define the tidal datums, the tidal zones, such as the low marsh, high marsh, and tidal buffer and subtidal and mud flat. And just for reference, overlaid on it is one of our shoreline transects that we surveyed. That's the one at the highest point of erosion, that steepest slope there in brown. So then we took those tidal datums and escalated those to anticipate sea level rise to inform the project design elevations. And we did not complete the 7-step nice process that DES has laid out for us. They kindly did it for us for this project. And they suggested either a 30-year or 50-year design target. And we actually initially did an alternative with the 50-year and then ended up revising it to the 30-year or for designing for the year 2050 to be more in line with landowner goals and various recommendations and what has been done on similar projects. A high tolerance for flood risk was identified for this site because none of the structures are currently at risk for flooding. And so with that information, the target sea level rise projection is 1.3 feet, which we added to the tidal datums that were determined from the water level loggers to escalate everything upward by 1.3 feet. And then this just shows, I mentioned that we put in those bank erosion pins. You can see one pictured in the bottom right there with the flag to mark it. So that's what it looks like when it's flush with the bank to start. And then, as I mentioned, Tom went out 2 additional times about a month later and then several months later in March to measure how far they were protruding from the bank. So that is kind of a measurement of the erosion rate. And we use that information to calculate and project out like an annual erosion rate, which we then applied to that 2050 design life, year 2050 design life, to escalate approximately how far the bank would erode under the no action alternative if nothing was done. And we came up with about 24 feet conservatively. So this is what all of that information looks like on a map. So in green are the bank erosion. So this is like the no action alternative if nothing was done. The current bank, which is shown in solid green, would erode back about 24 feet, which is shown in dashed. We didn't extend it over to the retaining wall section because it's unclear at this time, what would happen there, if that wall would be rebuilt or if it would eventually fall. So we just kind of focused on the natural shoreline for that. And then also shown as the current mean high water line in blue, and then the dashed projected mean high water line in dashed blue. And then further up in solid teal is the current high tide line or spring tide or king tide as it's also known. And then the dashed projected 2050 high tide line behind it. And so to see what that looks like in a photo, well, actually not all of those, but similar to that high tide line for existing conditions, this was a high tide, a regular high tide plus storm surge that was experienced in January of this year. Just got a picture of it at the site, so that was nice to have for reference. And Derek is going to talk about our concept design.
Okay. So yeah, so generally our concept design kind of followed marsh creation, like marsh enhancement method, where we kind of use some toe protection as well as, add our ideas to add some fill and use corridor logs to kind of give us some breaks in the slopes and kind of decide where we're going to do changes from high marsh to low marsh. In this photo here, you can kind of see what our general concept for our design was. Down at the bottom where you see the blue is kind of, we decided upon a stone toe. And that's because we needed to give some protection for our fill that was going to be placed to help create our salt marsh. The river experienced some pretty high ice flows, which has caused some significant erosion, as you saw in some of the previous slides. So we figured that stone toe would help to kind of prevent some of that erosion. And then as we transition up, we transition to our low marsh area, which kind of, was set, based off the elevations that we calculated, throughout the project. And then above that, we transition to our high marsh, which transitions at an exact corridor log, which you kind of see with the blue dashed lines, kind of show where our two corridor logs are in our design, and also give kind of some elevation breaks and kind of help us raise up an elevation at the site. And then also, because we were kind of taking back some of the original salt marsh that had been eroded, that we kind of saw at the site, we kind of thought that we gave an area where we were going to use as kind of a no-mow zone, or let the native salt marsh vegetation to grow in this red area. Because on our site visits, we saw that there was various types of salt marsh vegetation already starting to grow in his grassed area. So we kind of gave that as an area where, as sea level rises, it kind of gives us an area for our site to retreat in as water gets higher. And that's kind of more of the design of, you can actually specifically see where the different elevation breaks, where we put the corridor logs, and also different areas between high and low marsh, as well as the, the unmowed, high marsh transition area. And then to set our toe, we used the 2050 to 2030 mean tide elevation to set our actual elevation of our stone toe, and kind of built off of that to tie into the existing elevations that we had at our site.
Hi, I'm Tom. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some renderings and the plants. So we wanted to be able to discuss with the landowner, provide some visual examples for them as to what this might look like after the project has been built. So this first photo is basically what's existing now. You can kind of see some brown vegetation right above or towards the house side of that large rock. So that's an area that we've, both in the original site suitability assessment and also our initial assessment, we're already finding some high marsh plants that are growing in the lawn. They're just being mowed. So I'm going to start with actually the rendering and design that the landowner approved and selected. So here we're looking at what the low marsh grasses would look like in kind of the orange, yellow, green, and then eventually high marsh closer as you're looking at the photo. We did, though, also discuss some other opportunities, both to kind of mix a residential landscaping along with some more tidal buffer possibilities. Those were not selected, but I'll just show a couple of those quickly. So here we're adding to the initial design by adding some seaside goldenrod by the rock there, and some upland grasses like little blue stem and switchgrass above. Also, perhaps to kind of limit it to keep mowers out, adding rocks. These could be put really throughout the design to help break up ice too over time. So these are really just kind of the renderings that we're able to share with the landowner to help them decide on what planting plan that they would be most agreeable to them. Most of our planting other details are in our design memo. So I'll pass on to Conor to talk about permit.
So Kevin described all of the state permitting really well, and I'm not going to take away from that. So we do fall under the less than 200 linear feet for a minimum impact project. Unique to our site, we do have a Department of Historical Resources permit. This site was an old brick mill site, and we do have existing structures on. So we will be filing for a request for project review. I consulted with a local archaeologist. A phase 1A survey seems applicable to this project, because a phase 1B would be a digging holes and we'll just find more brick if we dig any deeper. And for local permits, we do fall under a conditional use permit for work in both a conservation district and a wetland district. That needs both Conservation Commission approval and planning board approval. We'll probably have to meet with the Conservation Commission twice because it is a unique project, and knowing them, they will like to see it twice. And then for next steps, this is just our general outline of get a design, start permitting sooner rather than later, both coordinating with the state and local. Then final design, construction, and any post-construction monitoring that we do choose. We're looking at plant success, erosion rate, and topo surveys. And with that, I'll end with pretty pictures.
Thank you all.